Wow. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to the Y for having me here. It's interesting times, to say the least. When I agreed to do this, which is really not that long ago, but still, I thought that this would be largely about tariffs. And that we'd be talking about, things move fast these days. I guess, I don't know, we used to talk about internet time, maybe it's Trump time. Things, the landscape shifts so drastically and so scarily that it's hard to keep track. And as it happens, as we sit here, the Senate is voting on the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. Which, if it passes, which is, I gather, still somewhat up in the air, but if it passes, will radically change our country, just like that. And actually, before I get into the sort of substantive economic policy stuff, I don't, and I can't see anybody given the lighting, so I don't know how many people know that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is the official title of the legislation. That's not me making fun of it. That is what it is actually called, and that in itself tells you a story. As people may have been aware, the president uses beautiful a lot, uses it more than anything else, uses beautiful to mean anything he approves of. And it's a weird quirk. I don't know, it's a verbal tick that I was trying to see if it has, if there's any subculture that it comes from, and I thought but it does, no one seems to know. It just seems to be, that's, for some reason, that's something he does, and it's a weird verbal tick. And he said, sort of almost in passing, last time he was in the White House, he tried to cut taxes for rich people, which he succeeded in, and tried to destroy health care for a few tens of millions of people, which failed. And so this time he was going to do them both at the same time, and as he says, in one big beautiful bill. And Congress, the House, the Senate, named the legislation that is being argued on the floor as we speak, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is, bizarre. This is, the leader has a weird way of speaking, and you are so determined not to in any way offend or to curry favor with the leader that you simply incorporate that. It basically this general feeling. This is not something that normally happens in republics, right? This is Washington D.C. turning into Pyongyang on the Potomac. It really is something you'd expect Kim Jong-un to be dealt with that way, not a U.S. president. But that's where we are right now, and I do think that is significant in understanding where we are. So what is happening? You can understand, I think, particularly the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but a lot of what else is going on. I have a kind of a unified theory to understand what's going on in policy right now, which is take basically everything good that has happened in America since Barack Obama took office in 2009, and let's destroy it. That would be that's a pretty good model for explaining a lot of what's in this legislation and some of the other things that are going on. So we had health reform. Obamacare, aka Affordable Care Act, is a it's a Rube Goldberg device. It's a complicated set of legislation that is not the way anyone would have designed a healthcare system from scratch, but nonetheless makes a huge amount of difference. And so if you count, I would say that of people who were uninsured, that were not undocumented immigrants, we've got something like 70% of them insured as a result of Obamacare, which still makes us, we're still the only advanced country without truly universal health care, but we're a lot closer to being a civilized country on that front than we were. So, of course, the bill will savage that. We'll have incredibly horrific cuts in Medicaid, which is a core piece of it, and also cuts in the other parts, but above all Medicaid, which will take the form not even of eliminating the program or reducing the categories of eligibility, but instead creating an obstacle course of paperwork that will make it extremely difficult for people to get through the application process, and will uniquely hurt people with less formal education, people without internet connections, people, in other words, exactly the people who most need help will be excluded. So it's an incredibly cruel measure, and I think this is Aaron Serwer, the cruelty is the point. This is a deliberate, we're going to undo Obama's legacy on health care. We've had this incredible revolution in energy. Solar and wind, renewable energy was kind of hippy-dippy pipe dream stuff in the 2000s, and then suddenly everything fell into place. We suddenly have a situation where fossil fuels in many cases are just plain not competitive. Coal really, even without government intervention, coal would disappear from the energy landscape. Solar and wind are about 90% of recent additions to electricity generation capacity. And we had a set of policies under Biden to accelerate the transition to renewables. So this bill kills those subsidies, and not just that, actually imposes taxes, special taxes on renewable energy. So it's a deliberate effort to kill the renewable energy revolution, even though the technology wants us to have clean energy, but the party in power doesn't. And so that's another big thing. The U.S. economy has done really well relative to other advanced economies, at least in terms of growth. There are some other things we don't do so well on, but we've had high productivity growth, and particularly we've really pulled ahead on technology. And if you ask why, well, it's the underlying that is the immense strength, capability of U.S. science. We are the leading place to do science in the world, partly because we have critical government funding, partly because we have these great research universities, and the close links between the research universities and the government funding and business. So, Silicon Valley starts basically around Stanford University. The U.S. biotechnology industry really starts around MIT and the hospital complex in Boston and so on. So what we have is immediate cut, something like 50%. In U.S. government support for scientific research, plus tremendous attack on science within the government. And we have the National Institutes for Health have effectively been paralyzed. We have Secretary of Health. We have Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I think we knew that he was something of a crank, but I didn't think anybody realized quite how far. He doesn't believe in the germ theory of disease. He believes that miasmas cause illness, and so doesn't believe in infection. So he's not just anti-vax, he's anti-germ theory. And this is heading, our most important, in many ways, our most important scientific agency in the United States. Again, what went right for the United States after the 2000s? It was this really amazing success in technology, which was based on science and our institutions of higher education, and so we're out to destroy them. Then, of course, the health coverage. It's so easy now to find fault with Obamacare, with the Affordable Care Act. It is certainly not the system that most of us would have designed, although a really large part of what it has done is expand Medicaid, which is Medicaid is a healthcare program for low-income people, and so it is stingier, less, more restrictions, lower pay for health for doctors and nurses than other programs, but nonetheless is infinitely better than nothing. And in fact, in a lot of ways, Medicaid is the U.S. version of the kind of health care that many other advanced countries have. But we're facing just really savage cuts, and there's a lot of back and forth about exactly how many people are going to lose coverage, but a reasonable number would be something like 16 million if this bill passes, and it could be more than that, and quite a few people will also be paying a lot more. Oh, and what I was going to say is that the imperfections, imperfect as the bill is, as the current healthcare system is, I think a lot of people have forgotten what it was like to live in a world where if you had a pre-existing medical condition and did not happen to have a job that came with generous health benefits, you were just out of luck. You just could not get covered. And I personally know people whose lives were saved by the fact that that coverage for pre-existing conditions was made available through that health reform. And all of that is basically on a chopping block now. So, boy, am I sounding? I've been friends said you need to end with something upbeat, so I will try at the end of this. But let's talk about that. The last thing I would say about where we are, right? Good things that happened. America, at least as I saw it, we became a more tolerant country in a lot of ways. I've been around for a while and tracked a lot of things through the changes in public attitude, changes in politics. If you go back, if we try to think about what America was like in the Reagan years, a clear majority of whites in America were opposed to interracial marriages. That's just 40 years ago. We were a country where interracial marriages were widely regarded as unacceptable, which I might say would be pretty bad for my personal life. And that went from almost universal, it went from widespread disapproval to almost nobody at least being willing to admit that they were against interracial marriages. We went from gay marriage being possibly what swung the 2004 election to George W. Bush, to it becoming very widely accepted in America. So we just in general became, I would certainly a more tolerant, more open, I would say a better society. And of course, all of that is now very, very much under assault. There's a level of sort of raw bigotry on multiple fronts. Presumably it was always there, but there was a point when people were afraid to, at least to admit to having those attitudes. And so all of this is it's the great dismantling of, I would say the dismantling of a lot of what makes America great. Okay, let me talk a little bit more about the specific things and then go on to the issues you might have expected me to be talking about or that I was expecting to talk about. But just let me say two things. Actually, three things. I'm turning into a Monty Python routine. That always happens. If this happens, if Medicaid is really on the chopping block, it's going to be primarily through the imposition of work requirements You have to prove that you're working or at least trying to work in order to get Medicaid. What you need to know about that is it's an entirely bogus issue. There are, to a first approximation, no Medicaid recipients who could work but are choosing not to. If you go down the list and you find out who actually receives Medicaid, it's people with disabilities, seniors, quite a few seniors receive Medicaid as well as Medicare, people who are who are caregivers for relatives, and about half of Medicaid recipients actually do work. And the number of people who, at least on a crude classification, could be working but aren't and are receiving Medicaid is very small. And probably most of them are it's just because there are circumstances that aren't captured by the official data. So it's basically a non-problem. The idea, it's like welfare queens driving Cadillacs. It's the modern equivalent. The Medicaid recipient who just is sitting on their couch and can't be bothered to work is a fictional character, and yet that is at the core of what's going on. And it's see amazing stuff being said about how we're going to do this. And we also, actually, as it happens, I spent many years teaching a course, first at Princeton, then at CUNY, on economics of the welfare state, which was mostly international comparisons. And one of the things that you discover in all issues of things like healthcare and so on is that most things that you might think of have in fact been tried. That we don't lack evidence. It's not a shot in the dark. And in particular, we do know exactly what happens when you try to get more people working by imposing work requirements on Medicaid or other social programs. And the answer is that a lot of people lose coverage because you've created too many bureaucratic hoops for them to jump through, and that essentially no people go to work. So the centerpiece of this whole thing is a policy that we know doesn't work. We know from recent experience in the United States, in places like Georgia, that it doesn't work. But nonetheless, there we are. Renewable energy. Climate change terrifies me, as it should, all of us. But the gods of technology gave us a great gift, which was that just in time, solar and wind became extremely effective and efficient, which meant that we still do have the opportunity to drastically reduce greenhouse gases without sacrifice. We don't have to have, there was a good case for having a carbon tax and things like that, but the fact of the matter is just mild subsidies to encourage the adoption of these renewable energy technologies is probably enough to achieve a huge energy transition with no visible negative effect on their standard of living. And we were making a good start on that until January 20th. And now it's all being rolled back. Science, technology, education. Again, the United States wasn't always the world's scientific leader. If you'd asked in 1930, what's the world's leading scientific nation, it would obviously have been Germany. And how did we get to being the scientific leader? It was partly through being a place that welcomed people from all around the world who had stuff to bring, who had useful talents to bring. It was partly through a lot of government funding, and it was partly through a university system that was and is without par. There are fine universities elsewhere in the world. I do a lot of traveling to European universities, but they have a long way to catch up with, or did have a long way to catch up with the U.S. system, which, among other things, just because of the openness of American society, has been so successful at attracting the world's best talent. I I get email. I think I'm the world's king of hate mail. But my two favorite genres are on the anti-immigration stuff. First, I actually do get seriously. I get people who say, how would you feel? You're all blithe about it, but how would you feel if New York was full of immigrants? And the other I get is how would you feel if there were lots of immigrants competing for professor jobs? And you should look at the composition of any leading department in the United States. Anyway, so okay, again, we're putting all of that at risk. I mean, I do know people. There are, as we speak, there are international scientific conferences being canceled or moved outside the United States because people may not be able to get visas or are afraid that they may arrive and ICE will demand to look at their phone, discover that they sent some texts critical of Donald Trump, and that they'll be sent back or even, it's been happening now occasionally, even imprisoned. So we're rapidly destroying that scientific base that has been so crucial to our success. Okay, let me talk about the things that I thought I was going to be talking about more. And by the way, I will say that this is, I just saw in today's paper that the next step is that the administration wants to start denaturalizing, taking away citizenship. This is quite personal. I have relatives who have been here since they were 7 years old, are U.S. citizens, actually, who are also, because of the family connections, are also people of color and with Spanish-speaking relatives, so that they will sometimes be out there speaking Spanish in public, and they all now carry passport cards with them to be able to wave in front of ICE. But we already know from a number of incidents that may not work. They may say, I don't see that. I don't believe it's real. And anyway, but then they could be losing the citizenship. So it's incredible. Is this America? Anyway, economics. There are two really big economic disruptions associated with all of this. I mean, the longer term, I think the destruction of our scientific and educational base is if you want to ask what's going to happen to the U.S. economy 15 years from now, that may be the biggest thing. But more immediately, there are two things. And tariffs have gained most of the attention. Understandably, we went drastic. We went from roughly from a less than 3% average tariff on when Trump took office, almost instantly up to what is now about something like a 17% average tariff. It varies by country, it varies by product. It is probably people have heard about the famous Smoot-Hawley tariff of 1930, which is often blamed for the Great Depression. I think that's actually being a bit unfair. There were a lot of reasons for the Great Depression, but still, it was always, the scare story that economists told people, and you don't want to do Smoot-Hawley again. But we actually have now tariff rates that are very close to what we had after Smoot-Hawley. And Smoot-Hawley was after many decades of high protectionism, whereas we went from near free trade to Smoot-Hawley level tariffs all at once in a world where trade is about 3 times as important relative to GDP as it was in 1930. So this is an enormous, enormous shock to the system. And worse yet, if it was permanent, if we knew it was there, then businesses could try to plan around it. One dirty little secret of international trade is that while there's universal agreement among economists that tariffs are bad, numerical estimates of how bad are probably not as large as many people think, but a tariff where you'd have no idea what tariffs will be next month, let alone next year, that is really bad. That makes planning pretty much impossible. I'm going to waste a couple minutes. I don't know if people, there were two big tariff announcements on April 2nd and on April 9th. And the April 2nd tariffs that was Liberation Day. God help us. I attended actual Liberation Day a few months ago because I was visiting Portugal, where I have a long relationship, and their Liberation Days, they celebrate the overthrow of the fascist government. Ours, we celebrate tariffs. But the tariffs were totally changed. After being one set of huge tariffs on April 2nd, we had a completely different set of tariffs, although the average tariff turned out to have been about the same, announced on April 9th. How did that happen? Well, it turns out we happen to know. I mean, let me say, I as people may be aware, I have had my problems with mainstream media, but we do need these reporters with insider access. It needs, and so we know how it happened. We know that two of the less crazy members of the Trump economic team marched into the Oval Office while they knew that Peter Navarro, who was substantially crazier, was in another meeting elsewhere in the White House, got Trump to totally change the tariff policy, stayed in the office until he posted it on Truth Social. This is the world's greatest nation making enormously consequential economic policy. And it's destructive. It must be nightmarish to be trying to run a business these days if you have any connection to international trade, because you have literally no idea what the policy environment will be. We have a supposedly crucial date next week when all kinds of things will happen, but nobody thinks that whatever happens then will be the end of the story. If you ask me, and I think probably most people who work on this, deportations are an even bigger economic issue than tariffs. And just leaving aside, the human side and masked men who claim to be ICE agents but have no identification, snatching people off the street. Again, is this America? But just plain in terms of economic impact, one of the things that an issue I've not really done original work on, but followed a lot over decades, is that we've learned that immigrants really don't compete very much with native-born workers. You might think that they do, but it turns out that even if they have the same formal level of education, they take very different jobs. They take often jobs that are grueling or dangerous, that native-born Americans, understandably don't want to do, and or they just may bring skills that, in fact, we don't have here. So that if you look at, so if you say, well, we're going to deport 1 million workers, which looks quite plausible in the not-too-distant future, it won't be 1 million workers spread from across the economy. It will be the core of the workforce that picks our crops. It will be the core of the workforce that does the heavy work in construction. It will be the core of the workforce in meat packing. So there will be individual industries that are really hard hit. And a good guess is that the inflationary impact, the negative impact on our standard of living of deportations is going to be even bigger than the effect of tariffs. So, and we are now less than 6 months in, and it's quite a picture to paint. Now, it's always a temptation to imagine that there's going to be imminent economic crisis because of policies you don't like, and that's usually that's a bad line to sell, because usually, even if there is going to be I had an old teacher, Rudy Dornbush at MIT, who was a great international economist, but maybe best remembered for his Dornbush's law, which says that the crisis takes longer to happen than you can possibly imagine, and then when it comes, it happens faster than you can possibly imagine. And so I don't think that we should be expecting necessarily to see everything fall apart, next month. But of course, the stock market, God knows what drives the stock market. Another of my teachers, Paul Samuelson, said, the stock market has successfully predicted 9 of the last 5 recessions. But you shouldn't be expecting catastrophe immediately, but my God, it's really wild stuff. And if you look at other markets, I was, God help me, in Brazil for a day last week. I should not have done that. But they're looking at interest rates and the dollar, and the fact that in the United States interest rates have gone up and the dollar has gone down, which never happens here. In America, when interest rates go up, U.S. investing in the United States becomes more attractive and the dollar goes up. And this combination of clearly people losing faith, international investors, whatever the stock market thinks, international investors are losing faith in America. The Brazilians were all saying, you look like us. And so we are starting to see signs that the U.S. looks like an emerging market. Now, we're a long ways, I think, from classic emerging market debt crisis, but it's not good. How does this end? The good news is that one of my great fears as we entered this era was that people would basically fall for it for a long time, that the public would just sit back and celebrate. Those criminal migrants are being rounded up, and all of those pesky energy regulations are going away, and that sort of thing. And that is not what we're seeing. There's polls. Issue polling is always problematic, but for what it's worth, the one big beautiful bill is polling worse than any legislation in memory, and there have been a number of special elections, and so far Democrats in special elections have outperformed 2024 by 15 points, so that the public is not buying it. And I don't know how many people, and again, I can't see anybody, but I don't know how many people went out for No King's Day. I was there. There we go. Anyway, all right. Well, I don't really need to show. Okay. And we think that there were 5 or 6 million people protesting that day, myself included, and that is saying that we actually have a fairly alert American public that will push back. Now, how it all plays out, there are all kinds of fantasies you can have, and we don't know, and we don't even know what's happening with the bill being debated on the Senate floor as we speak. But I don't think that, let me say, I actually think that the vicious cuts to social programs, that if this bill does pass, that they will not last. That in the end there will be just so much demand for at least a little bit of decency in this country that they will be reversed. It will take time. It will take a lot of struggle. But I think that will be okay. Other things, I don't know if we're ever going to get science education back to where they were. I don't think we're ever going to get the U.S. Reputation in the world back to where it was, because even if we get rid of this current regime, the world will always know that we are the kind of country that could have such a regime. That's a major, that's a loss of a breach of trust that you don't ever recover from, or it takes a long, long time. But weirdly, I'm actually a lot more hopeful than I was 3 or 4 months ago. It does seem to me that there's a lot more underlying decency in the nation, and a lot more pushback than you might have feared. And let's hope that I'm right, and I will have. I'm told I'm supposed to remind people that I have a Substack. That there's plenty to write about on the Substack, which is not a good reason to be going through hell, but as a small compensation, at least personally, for it. It is. These are wild times, and can I quote? Death of a salesman, attention must be paid. Thank you all. So, I believe that I'm supposed to get index cards with questions, and here they come.
Oh, there are so many that just came in. I couldn't go over all of them, so
All
just
right.
pick and choose what you think.
Okay. Actually, I'll just go with the top one right away about can Trump's policies cause a depression? Yes. Tariffs don't necessarily cause a depression or a recession. They make the economy less efficient, but you can other countries. Britain had about 25% tariffs in the 1950s, so quite even higher than what we have right now. It took a long time for them to get down to relatively free trade. They also had very low unemployment, so that's not the issue. Now, I think what really is the issue here is the uncertainty, is the craziness, the fact that no one knows what the policies will be. That's what might cause a recession rather than a depression. It takes a whole lot to push an economy into a full-scale depression, and we may be working on it, but I don't think we're there now. Okay. So much. Economic challenges New York City faces as we approach the mayoral election. I think it all comes down for New York to affordability. Almost everything else is really, in a lot of ways, I saw that after the mayoral election, Stephen Miller said, this is what happens to a society when it allows unrestricted migration. And New York society, as a society, looks pretty good. We have the lowest homicide rate probably in the city's history. We have a lot of, I was going to say, I do live on the Upper West Side, which is a little more affluent than the average, but still, go through, take a walk on Riverside Park. If you want to feel good about humanity, just to go walking through any New York City park on a nice day, and things are fine, and we have incredibly diverse neighborhoods that work just fine as a society. I have relatives in Jackson Heights. But what we don't have is housing that regular people can afford. And it's mostly housing. So the important thing for New York, I don't think that we're all of the billionaires saying, I'm going to leave because you're about to elect a leftist Muslim mayor. First of all, they won't. The ones who will are the ones who we're going to anyway. But the fact of the matter is, one of my favorite quotes, there was a Bloomberg article about the mostly failing attempts to move the financial industry to Miami, and one of my favorite was some private equity guy saying that the trouble with moving to Florida is that you have to live in Florida, I think the attractions of the city are enormous, but we have to build housing. I don't even think, even if it's not affordable housing, if you build more high-end housing, that frees up housing. The city needs to become, needs to provide more places to live so that it becomes more affordable again. And there are role models out there. There are giant cities that have much more affordable housing, which aren't necessarily the ones you think. I would never have imagined myself saying this, but gosh, in terms of housing policy, I wish New York was more like Tokyo, which is at these days surprisingly affordable. I'm going to disregard the ones about the ones about investing advice. This is always, even if I knew something, it would really be a bad idea. But what president was most successful in implementing smart economic policy? Look, most of the time presidents don't have a lot of influence on policy, on the economy. We just don't. Policy changes at the presidential level are normally too small to really move things very much. Most of the time, the management of the economy is up to the Federal Reserve rather than the president, and most presidential policy changes are too small. The only times really that it matters is times of crisis. And yeah, FDR made some mistakes, but led us through, and we emerged from the 1930s as a stronger economy, a stronger nation than we were, and also a more equal nation, which I think mattered. And although, these days, because of the election went the way it did, nobody wants to say nice things about Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is the economic policy under the Biden administration was, compared with any other country in the world, extremely successful. We had a stronger recovery. We had some narrowing of economic inequality. We maintained full employment. We did have a bout of inflation like everybody else, but we got rid of it without mass unemployment. So all the economists who said we were going to have go through a depression to get rid of that inflation were wrong. Fortunately, I wasn't one of them. This I would actually, if we didn't know that Democrats had lost the 2024 election, I think people would be looking at the record of economic policy from 2021 to 2024 and saying, that's a pretty good, successful case of economic management. This is actually a good one. What country do I think of as a good model? Look, nobody's perfect. Every country has its own quirks and negativities and virtues. I mean, at least until just the other day, I still think that America's openness was something that nobody else could really match. Even if legally they were, just as open as we were, the American society was more open to outsiders and change than anyone else. But look, we look at Denmark. The Nordics in general, but Denmark, per capita GDP is lower than it is here, but that turns out to be mostly because, unlike Americans, the Danes actually take vacations. So it's not clear to me that that's a problem, and there's no, there's nobody goes without health care because they can't afford it. There's just no intense poverty of the kind that we have here, which, by the way, in case you want to know, yes, they have a ethno-nationalist political movement there. So just doing the right thing, unfortunately, doesn't mean that you're safe from the demons that infect all of us. I've lately been spending some time in the Netherlands for various reasons, and that's another country that, again, just the sort of the general decency of the society just shows what's possible. Anyone who tells you, no, you can't, it's impossible to have health care for everyone. It's impossible to ensure that even in service occupations people earn decent wages, that it's impossible to eradicate extreme poverty. You want to say, look, there's countries over there. They're real, they exist, and they actually do all these things. And they also have life expectancies that are, 4 or 5 years longer than ours. So this is pretty. I would say any. Unfortunately, we don't have a category here. But in Europe, people will talk about social democrats. A social democrat is someone who believes mostly in a market economy, mostly profit-driven economy, which is mostly private business, but with some regulation and a strong social safety net. And I'm a social democrat, and the social democracies of Europe actually do fine. And they're feeling a little blue because they have fallen behind a bit in advanced technology. Not clear to me that that even will persist. And you might want to note that of the two countries I named, the Netherlands, the high-end equipment for manufacturing semiconductor chips all comes from ASML, a Dutch company, and the weight loss drugs are coming from Denmark. So it's not that they're not innovative. Has debt reached a point of no return? Economically, arithmetically, no, not remotely. Rich countries with stable governments that borrow in their own currencies have enormous ability to cope with and eventually work down debt. U.S. debt is currently is about as high as a share of GDP as it was at the end of World War II, and we dealt with that. Britain came out of World War II with debt that was 250% of GDP, 2.5 times what we have in the United States. They never had a debt crisis. They just gradually dealt with it. Do we have the ability to deal with it? Sure. The U.S. has one of the lowest tax rates, overall tax share of GDP in the advanced world. If we were to move even halfway to the average tax rates that other advanced countries have, we would have no trouble at all getting our debt under control. Or we could cut social benefits. We could actually, our healthcare is uniquely expensive, so if we could somehow reduce healthcare costs to something like what they are in other countries, although Medicare has made more progress on that than people realize, but still, there's a lot to go. That would also help, but all of that is really easy. The arithmetic of getting U.S. debt under control is really, really easy. Just say we need to get some powerful groups to accept change. We need to get people to accept the need for higher taxes. We need to get people to accept that we need to end the overpayments, the Medicare Advantage overpayments that are inflating the costs of Medicare. And try making those arguments on the floor of the Senate right now. So the problem is all political. It's not. There's no fundamental, level of unsupportable debt. There's kind of a related question. Future Social Security. Social Security, it's a weird, very typically American actually, that we set up a system where it is kind of deliberately is set up to look like what it isn't. So Social Security looks like a pension fund, where people pay in and then they get their money out. And if you treat it, and the accounting is done as if it's a pension fund, but it really isn't. It's just another government program that for accounting purposes we tie to a particular tax. So your FICA, the FICA on your paycheck is applied to Social Security, but there's nothing that says that Social Security has to be paid for out of FICA. And does the United States have the resources to maintain promised Social Security benefits? Yes, not a problem. I mean, almost all the baby boomers are now actually at retirement age. The demographic bulge is we have another point or so of GDP of rising Social Security expenditures as aging proceeds, but it's not. It's really not a huge burden. What we do have is that it's turned out that for reasons not worth going into, that the fix that was the 1985 fix that was supposed to secure Social Security until without further changes until 2060 isn't going to get us there. But could we find the resources to top up the system and keep it going? Sure. If nothing is done, just the mechanics, nothing is done, Social Security benefits will drop by something like a quarter when the trust fund is exhausted sometime in the next decade or so, possibly sooner. But it's easy to do something, and for what it's worth, I cannot really believe that that sharp benefits cut will be allowed to happen. I think there are just too many people who would affluent Americans have no idea how critical Social Security is to most of the American people. For most people, it is their retirement, and I cannot believe that it will be allowed to go under. Yeah, someone's asking about surveillance technology, and I have no idea. A little scary. I mean, to some, I don't know. I was actually two things. I was a fan of the old TV series Person of Interest, where the conceit was that the U.S. government already has a system that monitors everything, and then they built a whole elaborate plot around it. And then, rather weirdly, I spent 16 weeks on a New Jersey grand jury, which is not unfortunately the kind of grand jury where you indict, members of Congress. It means that in New Jersey, what that means is that once a week, the police present the reasons they made an arrest, and 23 citizens need to vote on whether that's adequate grounds to go to trial, which it almost always is. But anyway, one thing I learned is that actually, Person of Interest was pretty much right. If you think that you're private and that nobody is filming you, you are probably wrong. It's the security camera in the convenience store, the security camera in the funeral home down the block. The odds are very, very. They're all these, petty. The other thing you realize is so much crime is just. There used to be a TV show called America's Dumbest Criminals. But anyway, there's so much crime is really just petty and stupid. But the petty drug deals done on dead of night at 2 a.m. On a deserted street, more often than not, they are in fact on camera. So we're already there. This is how we live. I think I a question about cuts to research funding. Look, this is really serious. I mean, really glad that I didn't go into hard science, because it's absolutely devastating. Because what they do costs a lot of money, and I'm actually kind of glad not to be a young researcher anymore, because the resources are there. God knows what's going to happen. This is the scale of the cuts is just almost unfathomable. And it's not just, the way it's been working is not simply that no new grants, but they're just sort of stopping payments on existing grants, which, in the private sector would be breach of contract. I think actually is even for the public sector, but nonetheless it's happening all over the place. Okay. Somebody wants the impacts of a weakened U.S. dollar. Look, it helps U.S. exports. It slightly reduces imports. It adds to inflation. One of the arguments was that tariffs weren't going to raise prices that much because the dollar would go up, and the dollar has gone down instead. And this person just asked me to sign the card, and I have a problem, which is I've gone all digital, and I have no pen. So anyway, sorry. This is actually, I like this. Where do I have an opinion different to the majority of leading economists? It's one thing that people, I'm I think a lot more orthodox than many people imagine. That I very rarely, certainly in my post research public journalistic career, it's amazing how often the most controversial, red in the face rage things I've written are actually just basically Econ 101, written in plain English. I'm trying to think of any place that's really where I'm really all that heterodox, and it's hard to find. I've certainly been more relaxed about U.S. government debt than many economists, although I'm less relaxed now, given where we are politically, but not really outside the mainstream stuff. That would be a really good question. partly the things that I did when much younger that really were unorthodox and very different from the way people were talking. I've lived long enough to see them become orthodoxy, so that they're no longer points of disagreement. I was worrying about something like the post-2008 financial crisis, about 10 years before it was fashionable. I was part of a group of economists who looked at Japan, and instead of saying, oh, the Japanese are messed up, saying, gosh, this could happen to us. And that was a very unorthodox view in 1998, although among the small group of people who shared that concern was a guy by the name of Ben Bernanke. Don't know what happened to him. But at this point, those concerns, liquidity trap, to use the jargon, are perfectly mainstream. How can we transition to a single-payer system? I think this is actually a very good question. We did. Let me talk about Obamacare. We did not. I mean, a lot of people. If you'd asked, I think most economists who paid attention and thought about how to design, how they would design a healthcare system, if they could do it from scratch, they would have said single-payer, something like Medicare for all. In fact, one of my best friends, Mei Chung, who's the widow of Uwe Reinhardt, who was one of America's leading health economists, a colleague of mine when I was at Princeton. Mei and Uwe actually designed Taiwan's healthcare system. They were in a position to do that. And it's single payer. It's basically a Medicare for all system. Underfunded now, so that's one of those things that becomes a problem, but still. But if you asked Uwe or May, are you there going to advocate Medicare for all for the United States? They would say no, because the political lift is too hard. Too many people have employer-based insurance and think it's okay. The lesser problem is the insurance industry has a lot of political power, so we're going to have to do a compromise, which we did. But one more thing worth saying is that 70 million people are on Medicaid. I think about 50 million on Medicare, and particularly on Medicare, they're the expensive. Healthcare gets a lot more expensive as you get older. So in terms of where the dollars go, the United States already has more than half of health insurance spending in America is in fact coming from the government. We're a lot closer to having a single payer system than people realize. It's just there are tens of millions of people who are still getting insurance through their employers, but it would make less difference, I think, than people imagine. Oh boy. Monetary and fiscal policy for the rest of the year and next year. That's obviously really, we have Trump yelling at the Fed to cut interest rates, and the fiscal policy is clearly disastrous. There are times when you really want to run large budget deficits, which basically are times of emergency. During wars, the aftermath of severe financial crises, and global pandemics that bring the economy to a halt. Those are times when you really want to run big deficits. There is no warrant for running big deficits now, and yet we're doing it. So the fiscal policy is way out of whack. Should the Fed be cutting interest rates? The answer is, I don't know. Because there's so much uncertainty about where we really are and what's happening, and the secret, Jerome Powell doesn't know either, right? It is an inherently very hard situation. If I were him, I'd be doing what he is, which is sitting on his hands and waiting for more evidence. And it may turn out that in retrospect the Fed should have cut rates, but we don't know that now. We don't mean, just trying to imagine what the world economy will look like, let's say in January 2026, is already, the range of possibilities is just huge. So what is the right policy right now? In some sense, paralyzed fear is the appropriate attitude. Will manufacturing onshore help the economy? This is actually, and I will take just a couple more because I think we're all getting tired. Let me just say, what people don't, I think, really understand is that we used to be a country where manufacturing dominated the economy. It used to be, it's as late as, like 1970, a quarter of the workforce was in manufacturing and roughly the same share of GDP. That did not, and now it's about 10 instead of 25. And you say, well, that must be because we import everything, right? But that's actually not true. We do have a deficit in manufactured goods, and manufacturing would be bigger than it is if we didn't have that trade deficit, but not all that much bigger. So my back of the envelope says it would be 12.5% instead of 10%. Not a transformative change. You can look at Germany, which runs enormous trade surpluses. And Germany has more manufacturing than we do, but even Germany has way less manufacturing than it used to, and way less manufacturing than the United States used to. Basically, the reason we have so little manufacturing is that we do it so well, that it doesn't take a whole lot of workers to produce manufactured goods. It's the same, the United States is a gigantic exporter of agricultural goods with almost no farmers. And basically, roughly the same thing has been happening a little less drastically, but over time the same thing to manufacturing. Really good one here. Do I trust government-provided data any longer? Yes, for now, but the assault is underway. I was just yesterday looking for data on energy use in crypto mining, and the Department of Energy still has a page with those data, together with a note saying this page is no longer being maintained. So they're gradually shutting it down. Now, how far the politicization goes, whether we do, whether we become like Argentina during the Kirchner years, where it's all fake. I don't know. It's going to be we're watching, and I'm already, and I have friends who are more seriously working on making sure that they have ways of taking independent private sector estimates and using them to sort of keep a running check on the official data. So if it starts happening, we will know, but it's certainly something that's possible. And I'm going to conclude, but not really answering the question. So someone said, would Harry Seldon believe that Trump is the mule? So the reason, I don't think he fits the description at all. But if people don't know, I was definitely a teenage nerd, very much into Isaac Asimov's Foundation series. And in the Foundation novels, the mathematical social scientists, through their models, saved galactic civilization. And I wanted to be one of those guys. And this was as close as I could get. So that's sort of the story of my life. And there is a TV show, allegedly based on Foundation, and people tell me it's not bad, but I cannot bring myself to watch it because it bears no resemblance at all to the themes, to what, they took this really quite unusual, interesting idea of Isaac Asimov's and turned it into Star Wars. And it may be a good version, but I can't bring myself to watch it. So, yeah, and honestly, the The fundamentally implausible thing about, even though those were great novels by Asimov, the fundamentally implausible thing was to believe that human affairs can ever be predictable enough, that your equations are going to be able to let you know what's going to happen 200 years out. I don't even know what's going to happen 2 months out. I think that's the end of today's session. Thank you all.
Now we're going to chart a course in the Indo-Pacific, and no better panel to do that than Nick Burns, we all know well, our co-chair of Aspen Strategy Group, and the former ambassador of the United States to China, and he's back at Harvard. Also, we have Kevin Rudd, currently ambassador of Australia to the United States, and also the former Prime Minister of Australia. Mike Green is joining us. He's the professor and CEO at the United States Study Center and former special assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and senior director for Asian Affairs at the National Security Council. And our moderator today is Dimitri Sevastopoulos from the Financial Times. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Niamh. Before we start, Kevin has told me that he's here in his individual capacity and not as the ambassador of Australia, which means I'm going to actually expect him to answer some very tough questions because he can't get in trouble back home.
Yes, I can.
So let me thank you, all of you, to start off. Let me start with you, Kevin. Does President Trump have a clear strategy on China?